I'm going to share with you now the TAR3 model. It's a simple process you can use in any situation with any child to connect with them and help them through an episode of distress. Many of you will have done medical first aid and used the Dr. ABC principles. TAR3 is a psychological first aid framework that you can use to help a young person in distress. T stands for triggers. This is the things that occur in the young person's life that start to drive the episode of distress. The next thing are actions. The actions you'll see from the young person when they're coping and the types of actions they'll use to let you know that they're not coping. The first R stands for response. This is the way that you try and connect with the young person during that episode of distress. The second R is reaction. It's what you'll get back from the young person when you try and connect with them. And lastly, the resolution of distress. The interventions and the strategies you can use to help the child further de-escalate their distress. Okay, so let's break that down. The first one is T for triggers. There are 4 different types of triggers: internal, external, environmental, and social. Internal triggers are those things that drive episodes of distress for young people that they own. A poor night's sleep, too many red frogs, physical pain, a mental health condition, anxiety, depression, intrusive thought like I want to hurt myself, anything that the young person brings. External triggers, the second type, are those that come from the outside. These are the things like parental expectation, exams, getting up in front of the class and having to talk in front of a camera or something like that. Even things like rules. There are even some young people who don't like rules. So it's anything that puts pressure on the young person from the external. The third type of triggers are environmental triggers. These are things like too hot, too cold, person's too close to me, dark places, loud banging noises and raised voices. And lastly, there are social or relational triggers. These are the ones where getting into a fight with a peer or being isolated or left out or feeling rejected or abandoned. The next part of TAR3 is A for actions. When a young person is triggered and starts to experience an episode of distress, what will happen is they will try and use their already established coping and resilience actions and behaviours. They'll dig into their toolkit and they'll try and manage the distress themselves. Lots of times young people do this and no adult knows about it, and that's the self-mastery that comes with building their own coping resilience skills. However, what happens is if a young person becomes distressed and tries to use those strategies and their coping and resilience skills and they're not able to do it themselves, or the distressing event is so intense and just bypasses their ability to manage themselves, what they'll do is whole nother set of actions called help-seeking actions. You'll probably know them better if I had my stigmatizing hat on as attention-seeking behaviour. When it comes to help-seeking actions, these are actions and behaviours that the young person will do that indicate they're not coping. This is the fight, flight, freeze or faint response. It's an instinctive survival mechanism that will happen when they're under stress. When a young person goes into the direction of fight or flight, or what we call externalizing behaviours, these are the ones that are hot, reactive and angry. What you'll see from the young person are things like running away, slamming the desk, swearing at you, telling you to make love and travel, and punching and destroying things. In the early stages of this externalizing reactive direction, what we'll see is the young person will probably start to fidget. They won't be able to concentrate. They'll start to disrupt the people around them. Their voice will get a bit louder. They'll get the fixated gaze. It's really important that if we can recognize these early warning signs, we can respond to them earlier and help them in that time of distress. If we miss those cues though, what you'll see is that it will continue to escalate until you see those more overt and reactive behaviours like violence and aggression. Another direction young people can go in when they're triggered to an episode of distress is to the internalizing, the freeze or faint response. This is the cold, where guilt and shame and shutdown and withdrawal occur. The young person will go inwards within themselves. The earliest warning signs of internalizing behaviours are things like just starting to go quiet, disengaging in activity, and young people start to daydream. They might absent-mindedly pick at their skin or their hair. as the young person continues to escalate in this internalizing direction, they'll probably start to isolate, leave the environment and not be with their peers, and really shut down and be difficult to engage. The feelings associated with this freeze or faint are shame and guilt, and you can often get self-harming behaviour. What also occurs at the very end of this continuum is young people can experience a disconnect of mind and body, what we call dissociation. One of the really important things to consider with the fight, flight, freeze or faint responses is that when it comes to externalizing behaviours, we can see them. The young people, we know these young people. They're loud and disruptive, and even the earliest warning signs are easy to pick up on. But when it comes to children who internalise, they fly under the radar. You will notice the earliest warning signs of externalizing behaviour far more, even than later stage internalizing behaviours. So we've covered the T, the triggers, we've looked at the actions, the coping and the help-seeking actions. The first R is the response. When an adult recognises that the young person is not coping and they're exhibiting these internal or externalizing help-seeking actions, what we need to do as the adult is to do our initial response and make a connection with the child to help them in that time of distress. The initial response is your interpersonal connection. It is your tone of voice, the language and the words you use, your body language, your presencing, and the general approach that you have in the moment to mindfully connect with that child to earn the right to work with them in their time of distress. I can't emphasize enough the importance of the initial response. It's just our job in that moment to try and make that connection with the young person. So we've tried our initial response and we've tried to connect with the child in their moment of distress. What will happen is the next R in TAR3 is reaction. The young person will react to your connection that you're trying to make with them, and they'll do one of two things. One direction that they might go in is to accept the support you're offering. When a young person accepts your care, what they'll do is they'll do things like turn their body towards you, make eye contact or follow instructions or do something to say, good job adult, I'm happy to receive your care and be supported by you in this time. If we get accepted by the young person after our initial response, we can then move to the third R in TAR3, resolution of distress. The resolution of distress is really just the strategies and interventions that young people use to cope with distress. These are distraction, mindfulness and sensory-based things like going for a walk or having a cold drink or being wrapped in a blanket or colouring in or listening to music, any of those types of things. And it's those strategies that help compound the connection you've made to help the young person resolve their distress. Even if you make the connection and the young person accepts your care, if you move to the interventions and strategies, even if their distress remains the same, that's okay, as long as we're not making it worse. All distress is time limited, and eventually the young person will move back to a calm state where you can disengage from them. But sometimes we do our initial response and the young person will do a different reaction, and what they'll do is they'll reject your care. Now, a young person might reject you because, you know what, we're human and we're adults and we say the wrong thing. I've got a big foot and a big mouth for a reason. And they just aren't able to accept our care. And so whether it's our fault or the young person just isn't in that space, then that's okay. We're the adult. Young people with histories of trauma, disrupted attachment, and those young people with illnesses like depression where they feel like a burden to others are more likely to reject you than children who don't. It's okay if you get rejected by a child. They're going to do things like tell you to go away, turn their body away from you, avert their eye gaze, or do something, aggression and violence, something just to let you know either you didn't quite get it right or they're just not in the space at that time. If we get rejected by a young person and move straight to fix it and use the distraction and interventions and those things, what it sends the message to the child is that it's invalidating and I haven't heard them. And often what that will do is escalate the episode of distress. What we need to do if we're being rejected by the child is remember we're the adult. And what we do is we just keep working over and over again until we make that connection, and then we can move to the resolution of distress. Now, if there's one tip that I can give you, it will be this one. An episode of distress is not the time to bring up with young people the types of actions and behaviours that aren't so helpful, like their help-seeking actions, or their rejection behaviours, okay? To discipline means to teach someone, and nobody can learn through an episode of distress. What we need to do is go back at a later date, a later time, when the young person's back in their calm zone and doing well, and talk to them and help reflect on the episode of distress. In the moment is not the time, and it's not going to help you or the child.